Welcome to another episode of Tales from the Hangman's Record. My name is Steve Fielding. These stories are taken from my 3-volume series of books, The Hangman's Record, covering every execution in Great Britain and Ireland between 1868 and 1964. Copies of these, and many of my other titles, can be obtained through my website, stevefielding.com. If you enjoy the video, please subscribe and press like to help us reach a wider audience. If you can spare £1 or $2 to help the channel to continue to grow, donations can be made by clicking the thanks button below the video or in the link paypal.me/thehangmansrecord. As always, use the comments below for thoughts on the case, whether justice was seen to be done, and suggestions for future episodes in the series are always welcomed. Today's tale from the Hangman's Record takes us back to 1946, and the world tried to readjust to peace after 6 years of war. George VI, King of the United Kingdom and the Dominions of the British Commonwealth, is beginning his 10th year on the throne. Labour Prime Minister Clement Attlee has replaced wartime leader Winston Churchill in number 10, and Harry S. Truman is President of the United States. Globally, the aftermath of the Second World War dominates politics, economics and society. The Russian divide of Germany and Eastern Europe saw the Cold War take shape, with former allies the US and Soviet Union emerging as rival superpowers. It was in this year that Winston Churchill coined the phrase the Iron Curtain to describe the separation across the European continent. The year would also see the first sitting of the newly formed United Nations, which, like the League of Nations 21 years earlier, was set up post-war with the aim of preventing future global conflict. In a Britain scarred with bomb sites, rationing and housing shortages, popular music was mostly swing and jazz bands, with the jitterbug the big dance craze of the year that also saw wartime favourite George Formby awarded an OBE for his services to entertainment and boosting morale of Allied soldiers. Professional sport returns with first-class cricket and league football. In the FA Cup, tragedy occurs at Bolton Wanderers Burnden Park when, starved of top-class football, an estimated 80,000 fans packed the ground to watch a quarter-final tie featuring England internationals Ray Westwood and Stanley Matthews, causing a crush that left 33 dead. The game started despite bodies being laid out behind the goal, but was abandoned after half an hour when the scale of the disaster became apparent. The match ended goalless, with Bolton going on to win the second leg 2-0, before losing to runners-up Charlton Athletic in the semi-finals. On film, A Matter of Life and Death, Green for Danger and David Lean's Great Expectations are amongst the most popular, whilst in the theatre, the first performance takes place of J.B. Priestley's An Inspector Calls in the West End. On the 1st of June, television licences are made compulsory, a week before the BBC Television is relaunched after a wartime shutdown. And, in a quiet part of the Garden of England, a series of brutal murders take place that have police in Kent wondering if there is a serial killer on the loose. It was just after 10:30 on Saturday night, the 16th of February 1946, when two young women, Kathleen Mobbs and Iris Evison, were heading towards their homes on Reed Avenue, Canterbury, Kent, in the southeast of England. After a visit to the cinema earlier that evening, the two, members of the Women's Land Army, were walking along Sturry Road when they heard someone moaning in the nearby allotment. They appeared over a hedge, but failing to see anything, headed towards the path at the entrance, where they at first thought they had disturbed a courting couple. Despite being a cold winter's night, the man and woman were lying on the grass, in the darkness, about 3 or 4 yards down the path. It was a moonlit night, and at the same moment, a buzz came by, and from the headlights they could make out that the man was wearing a dark suit and a light raincoat. They could also see the girl's thighs were exposed, and she appeared to be struggling. They shouted for the man to stop, and getting no answer, shouted again, "Leave her alone." The man responded by telling them to scram. The girls passed the entrance and told the man, "I'll fetch a policeman," to which he replied angrily, It's all right, fetch a bloody policeman." Deciding it was best not to get involved, they then made their way home. At 6:30 on the following morning, Reuben Atwood, a young farm lad, was making his way to work to milk some cows on a farm near Vauxhall Lakes, close to Sturry Road. His route took him along a path through the allotment when he saw the body of a woman. The police were soon on the scene along with the doctor, who found that she had been dead for some time and appeared to have been lying where she was found all night. She was identified as 20-year-old Lillian Miller, who lived with her brother Fred Kemp and his family at 30 Vauxhall Crescent, and the police learned that on the previous evening she had attended a dance with Fred and his wife at the Odeon Hall in Canterbury. Lily had danced most of the night with a number of military personnel from the nearby camps, including some Danish soldiers, and it was learned that she had left the dance in the company of a Dane a short time before her brother. Detectives spoke to the two girls, who mentioned what they had seen, and though they did not recognise either the man or woman, one said she might recognise his voice if she heard it again. Both did agree, though, that he had a deep voice, and they did not think his accent was that of a foreigner. More likely he was a local or a Londoner. On the following day, the two women attended parades at a number of army camps, but could not pick out the man. The Danish soldier then came forward and claimed he had said goodnight outside the dance hall and she had made her way home alone. He was able to satisfy the police he was not the man seen in the allotments, and the inquiries were then directed elsewhere. With Detective Superintendent Frank Smead handling the investigation, the Chief Constable of Kent, Sir Percy Silito, announced that they were looking for a man thought to be between 20 and 30 years old, tall, well-built, with his hair brushed back, a flushed face, and wearing a dark suit and a light-coloured raincoat, of the type issued to D-Mob soldiers. At the initial inquest, it was stated that Lillian Miller's body must have been dragged a distance of some 40 or 50 yards along the path before she had been strangled. Canterbury and Kent pathologist Dr. Morris said that cause of death was due to manual strangulation, adding that her body had considerable bruising and some scratching, along with evidence of a criminal assault, and that her injuries had been caused before death. She had also been sexually assaulted. PC Corbett gave evidence that when he reached the allotment, he saw Lillian Miller lying on her back. She was wearing a green and white flowered frock, a grey and brown herringbone tweed coat, and a pair of black lace shoes. Her body was exposed to the waist, and there was a loose, untied scarf around her neck, concealing the injuries below. They also found a torn brassiere a few inches from her outstretched right hand. She had no clothing underneath, and there was no sign of her underclothes anywhere in the vicinity. Lillian was the wife of a Canadian soldier, William Miller, who she had met while working as a clippy, and he was in the area with his unit awaiting transfer to fight in Europe. They had married in 1942, and 3 years later had a son, Victor, and when Billy Miller was posted back home and demobbed, they secured a house in Montpelier, Canada, and Lillian had her bags packed and transportation arranged for her and her son to join her husband. A few days later, a distraught Bill Miller flew in from Saskatchewan. His flight was delayed by bad weather, forcing it first to land in the Azores before making its way onto Prestwick Airport in Scotland. He then made his way to Kent to collect his son and attend the funeral of his wife, which took place at Canterbury Cemetery on the following Saturday. It was a harrowing ordeal for her twin sister Violet, who kept crying out Lily's name as a service took place in the packed church, and as the body was laid to rest, both she and the widowed husband dropped red roses onto the coffin, and Lily had to be held back from collapsing into the grave. Although the police announced that they expected an early arrest, it proved not to be. Bill Miller returned to Canada with his young son, and after a final inquest on the 6th of April 1946, the coroner announced a verdict of murder by person or persons unknown. Then, just a matter of weeks after that inquest, with the file on the murder of Lily Miller still on his desk, Superintendent Frank Smead had to deal with another murder, when the body of a young girl was found close to the historic Brandside racing track. In the early hours of Monday the 8th of July, the body of 11-year-old Sheila Martin was found lying face down, partly covered with nettles, in a copse at Sunhill Wood, Falcombe Green, a dozen miles south of Dartford in Kent. She had last been seen playing on a swing suspended from a tree behind her home at Fairview Cottage at about 4:30 on the Sunday afternoon, and had been reported missing later that evening. Family and neighbours from the village joined the police in a search, and just after midnight, farm worker George Booker discovered the body just 300 yards from her home. Detective Superintendent Smead immediately requested the assistance of Scotland Yard, and later that day, Detective Superintendent Robert Fabian and Home Office pathologist Dr. Keith Simpson arrived at the scene. Simpson confirmed she had been strangled with her own hair ribbon tied in a granny knot, and she had also been sexually assaulted. Fabian was initially concerned that searching for the killer was going to be made much more difficult because on the Sunday afternoon there were around 9,000 people attending a motorcycle racing event at the Brands Hatch circuit barely half a mile away. However, Simpson was able to say that Sheila had been murdered while the racing was in progress, effectively ruling out those attending at the racetrack. Despite this, teams of officers made 3 visits to Brands Hatch, appealing for information from anyone who had been at the meeting on the day of the murder and may have seen anything suspicious. It drew a blank. Meanwhile, detectives announced that they were interested in speaking to a youth aged around 16 who had been seen near the village school in Falcombe Green on the Sunday. He was described as wearing a brown sports coat, an open-necked shirt and grey flannel trousers, and wearing a red rose in his buttonhole. At a police conference, it was announced that they planned to interview every man, woman and child within a 3-mile radius, and they asked for information on any men under the age of 20 currently missing from home. This also came to nothing. The young lad with the red rose was spoken to and eliminated from inquiries, and every lead that came into the murder headquarters quickly petered out. Gradually, the inquiry had to be scaled back, and Detective Superintendent Robert Fabian reluctantly returned to London, leaving the Kent detectives to continue the investigation. At the inquest held in Dartford later that summer, Coroner W.J. Bennett told a jury of 9 men that Sheila had been the victim of a diabolical assault. Her father, Leslie Martin, broke down in tears as he detailed the last time he had spoken to her. He said Sheila was of a nervous disposition and shy with strangers, but she was in the habit of going out to the locality with her best friend, the 13-year-old daughter of a neighbour. He had become concerned about Sheila at about 8 o'clock that Sunday evening when he saw the friend alone, and then learned that they had not been together at all that afternoon. Once all the evidence had been concluded, like in the case of Lily Miller a few months earlier, the jury returned a verdict of murder by person or persons unknown. Then, just a few weeks later, Kent police were called to another incident that had them wondering if there was a serial killer at work. Labour in Vane Hill, a dozen miles east of Maidstone, had gained its name when hikers climbing to the summit of the picturesque Wrotham Valley found their views thwarted by trees. It stood close to an area known as the Devil's Kitchen, a former gypsy campsite just off the A20, the main road linking Dover and London. 37-year-old Joe Hammond had once played football for London Paper Mills before a transfer to Queen's Park Rangers, where he played outside right for a couple of seasons in the 1930s. With his football career over, he was now back at the paper mill and making his living for them as a lorry driver. On Thursday morning, the 31st of October 1946, he was driving a wagon loaded with 6 tons of paper from Maidstone to Dartford along the A20 near Wrotham when he spotted something that caught his attention. The heavily laden lorry was in a low gear, and as he navigated the incline and looking out of the window, he spotted what looked to be a brand new lady's shoe lying on the grass verge about 12 foot from the road. Hammond stopped the lorry, and as he went to take a closer look, was shocked to find the body of a woman lying behind a bush parallel to the road. From marks on her neck, it appeared she had been strangled and had seemingly been dragged to where the body had been left, most likely in an attempt to hide it from passing traffic. Hammond drove to the nearest telephone box, where a call was put through to the local police, who were soon in attendance. A doctor was also called, but other than certifying death had occurred, he did not investigate too closely for fear of contaminating evidence, as this was certainly a murder scene. Under the command of Superintendent Smead, detectives began combing the area for clues and finding no sign of a struggle, deduced that she had been killed elsewhere and then dumped in the bushes at the side of the road where she was found. With the discovery of another body, Smead pondered that whoever had strangled Lillian Miller and Sheila Martin may have struck again. Was there a serial killer at large in the sleepy Kent countryside? Smead wasted no time in calling in Scotland Yard, and Detective Superintendent Bob Fabian, Detective Sergeant Bill Rawlings, and Home Office pathologist Dr. Keith Simpson were soon back in Kent, just a matter of months after working together on the Sheila Martin murder, which had occurred barely 3 miles away. The body was removed for a post-mortem examination to Borough Green Mortuary, where Simpson found there was no sign of sexual assault, with cause of death strangulation from a plain cloth ligature or scarf. He also said she had been sitting upright when killed, and this strongly suggested she had been a passenger in a car or lorry and then dumped at the scene. The woman was quickly identified as Dagmar Petrywalski, an eccentric 48-year-old Polish spinster who lived on Eva Avenue, West Kingston. Known locally as Dagmar Peters, she had worked for the post office as a telephone operator before taking early retirement 5 years earlier. She lived in the grounds of her mother's bungalow in a shack she called the Vic, and since the death of her father a year earlier, relations between mother and daughter had become strained and they had barely spoken for months. Fabian interviewed the mother, 80-year-old Mamie Peters, who told him she had implored her daughter time after time not to use lorries to take lifts into London. She said that one day a week, Dagmar would rise around 5:30 and set out to visit her brother and sister-in-law in Woking. Rather than take a bus or train, she would instead make her way down to the Dover Road and flag down a passing lorry and hitchhike first into London and then on to Surrey. Following the talk with Mrs. Peters, Fabian announced that they were anxious to find a number of items belonging to the victim which she had been known to be carrying with her. Missing was an attaché case she would use to carry her packed lunch and jam sandwiches, a yellow hand-crocheted shopping bag with a brown horseshoe purse of leather and chrome, and a Yale door key. It was also believed she was carrying a tiny Jack Russell puppy, bought on the previous afternoon in Maidstone Market and intended as a gift for her sister-in-law. Police set up roadblocks on the Dover Road, speaking to hundreds of car and lorry drivers who were stopped and questioned about their movements around the time of the murder. Nothing of any help to the investigation came from this. None of the missing items had been found near the body, and Fabian felt they must have been discarded somewhere, as anyone found in their possession would almost certainly be incriminated. Fabian discovered that the string bag had been crocheted by her sister-in-law, Elena Peters, and he asked her if she would make an identical bag. She readily agreed and sat up all night knitting away, and by the morning presented the detective with an identical copy of the yellow bag. Fabian arranged for photographs of the bag, along with requests for information relating to it, to appear in both local and national papers. This was to prove to be a masterstroke. On the following morning, 15-year-old farmer's son Peter Nash was eating breakfast at his home in Westmoreland when his father laid down the morning papers and went outside. Picking it up, he instantly recognised the picture of the bag as being identical to one he and his friend had pulled from a lake at nearby Clare Park several days earlier. The young lad reported this to detectives and took them to where he had found the bag. But how had the bag made its way into the lake? This was something the detectives would have to discover if they were to crack this case. The lake at Clare Park was surrounded by a high fence, so it was something of a mystery as to how the bag was found floating in the murky water. Fabian learned that Peter had given the bag to a friend, and within 48 hours it had changed hands 4 times, each time having been given a thorough cleaning. Not expecting much in the way of clues from it, Fabian nevertheless had the bag sent to the Home Office Science Laboratory. Dr. Harry Olding was able to report back that they had detected brown and black dog hairs and fibres that matched both Dagmar Peters and her sister-in-law. This was proof that it was the missing bag. The 2 Scotland Yard men mulled over how the bag could have ended up in the lake, and why would whoever thrown it there have gone to the trouble of making their way there and throwing it over the fence. They were still wondering if there was any way the bag could have got washed into the lake when Fabian got to hear about local girl guides who, to amuse themselves, would write messages and put them in bottles which they would drop into a stream next to a mill at East Malling and then retrieve them a few hours later from the lake. They'd been carried there by an underground stream. Detectives then made a series of experiments in which items similar to the bag were dropped into the stream at various points and see if they would emerge into the lake. The test found that if the bag was thrown into the stream beyond Galwell's ciderworks, it would not reach the lake. This would suggest that the person who disposed of it might well have called at the mill on the day of the murder. None of the statements made by the lorry drivers found anyone who had visited the site on the day of the murder, nor did any of the garages spoken to in the exhaustive inquiries find a driver who had undertaken such a journey. Fabian and his sergeant visited the ciderworks, and as they examined the banks of the stream and the mill yard, they noticed a pile of bricks in one corner. They checked with the mill owner and discovered they had been delivered on the day of the murder. They traced the delivery company to Cambridge, and he told them that the load had been taken by a driver named Sidney Sinclair. The garage owner was then questioned by detectives why he had not reported that one of the drivers had been in the area on the day of the murder. He told them because nobody had been to ask that question. It turned out that the garage was on the border of the county and borough police forces, and each had assumed the other had made their inquiries there. The garage owner said that the driver, Sidney Sinclair, had left the company in the previous week. He was traced to a local address and invited to Cambridge Police Station to speak to detectives about his movements on the day of the delivery. Fabian and Rawlings sized Sinclair up as he walked into the interview room on Saturday afternoon, the 9th of November, and noted he was stocky and powerfully built, with a definite bruise on his face. To the experienced detectives, he clearly had the aura of an old lag, and Fabian felt he fitted the profile of a potential suspect. "What do you say your name was?" Fabian asked. The man shuffled and looked uneasy as he replied, "It's Sinclair." Fabian then decided to call his bluff. "Come on now, how long has it been Sinclair?" he said, fixing him with a steely gaze. Sinclair kept eye contact for a few seconds, then his gaze dropped from the detective's face to the floor. "It's Hagger," he said, in a sullen voice. "Harold Hagger." As Fabian continued the interview, Rawlings left the room and a call was put through to Scotland Yard Record Department, who came back with the news that Harold Hagger was a 45-year-old ex-con with a long criminal record. Born in 1901 in Upper Holloway, North London, he had 16 previous convictions for larceny, shopbreaking and assault. In the summer of 1917, keen to do his bit for king and country, he enlisted in the army. But when his father learned of this, he sent his son's birth certificate to the Ministry of Defence, and in early October 1917, Hagger was discharged from the army. Although he'd only served 2 months without seeing action, he returned to Civvy Street having already amassed a criminal record for theft and assaulting a police officer. Over the next 10 years, he served a number of further sentences for thefts, assaulting police officers, pickpocketing and shopbreaking, and earning the nickname Basher Hagger. In 1927, he married Sophia Catton in Islington, a year after the birth of their son, christened Ronald Arthur Catton. Then, at Cambridge Registry Office in 1940, Hagger bigamously married widow Daisy Lindsell, with no record of any divorce and before Sophia Catton had died. The interview continued with Hagger denying any knowledge of the crime, and with no evidence other than suspicion that he may be the guilty man, he was allowed to leave. A week later, Hagger was again interviewed, and this time he admitted he had found the attaché case and yellow string bag by the side of the road, but denied any involvement in the murder. By now, Fabian and his team were convinced that they had their man, but needed to unpick his statement and prove he was involved in the murder. On Friday the 22nd of November, Sinclair was taken by Fabian and Rawlings over the route he had taken from Cambridge to East Malling, where he delivered the bricks to the ciderworks. He pointed out the various waypoints he had mentioned in previous statements, and the cafe where he had stopped for about 3 hours during the night of Wednesday the 30th and Thursday the 31st, and the top of Ferdingham Hill where he had stopped as his radiator was boiling over. Hagger then showed the officers where he had turned off the main road by the council yard and showed them where he had stopped the lorry by the cider works. They went round to the outside of the works and Hagger pointed out where he had thrown the net bag and the pair of gloves into the stream. Then, on the following day, Hagger asked to see Fabian, telling him that something had been preying on his conscience and he'd been unable to sleep for the past fortnight. He was then cautioned and made a statement admitting to the killing of Miss Peters but maintaining that it had been accidental. I have asked to see you because I thought this business over all night and feel it is better for me to tell the truth about what happened. What really happened was that when I was driving along the road after my second stop, because my radiator was boiling, I saw a woman and she held up her hand for me to stop. I pulled in and she said, "I want to get to London." I said to the woman, "I shan't be going back to London till between 9 or 10. She said, "Can I come with you now?" And I said, "You can come if you like." She said, "Where are you going then?" And I said, "I've got to take these bricks to East Malling." She then said, "All right, I'll come with you." She got into the cab and put an attaché case on top of the engine cover. When she got in, she said something about a puppy, but I didn't see one. She must have put it down by her side or had it tucked inside her coat. I started off and drove a little way when the woman said, "Will you pull into the little fork turning just along the road as I want to talk to you?" I said, "I will pull in for a few minutes if you like, but I haven't got much time." "What do you want to talk about?" By this time, she had pointed to where she wanted me to pull in, and I pulled up and switched my headlight off. It was the one on the near side. I said, "Now what do you want to talk to me about?" She said, "Have you got any money on you?" I said, "I always carry plenty of money with me on this job." And she said, "I haven't got any money and I want to get some to get to London." I said I had about £17 10 shillings in my coat. She then said, "If you give me money, you can't interfere with me, but I will play about with you." While she was talking to me, she must have been messing about with my jacket, and the next thing I saw, she had my wallet in her hand and was putting it down her breast. I turns around to her and says, "So that's your bloody game, is it?" And with that, I hit her round the side of the face. She started kicking and screaming. As I went to get hold of her around the neck, something came away, which turned out to be a vest, which she must have been using as a scarf. With that, I went to pull the scarf and must have pulled it too hard, and next thing I saw the still body of the woman, and this frightened me. I shook her and she just slumped down. In the struggle, the woman had kicked the cab door open, and I got panicky and closed the door, backed out onto the road and drove on towards East Malling. I travelled on for a distance, and halfway down the hill, which turned out to be Wrotham Hill, I stopped, got out, went round to my near side, opened the door and had a look to see if anyone was coming. I then lifted the body out of the cabin, carried the body across the verge and laid her behind the hedge. I then went back to my lorry, shut the cabin door, went round to the offside and got into my seat. I let the brake off and let the lorry coast down the hill to start the engine up. As I was driving away, it was getting daybreak. I found the attaché case was still in my cabin. Then I saw the vest the woman had was also in the cabin too. I drove on to West Malling and asked a bloke on a bike the way to East Malling. He told me to carry on and turn right by the council yard. I kept on and turned right as he told me and into the cider works yard. I pulled up outside the gates for the main entrance. I switched my headlights and engine off, still being shook over what I had done. Sinclair then continued. I goes in and sees a gentleman sitting at a desk and asked him where the bricks was going. He said they would be going through the outer gate on a bit of waste ground at the back. By the time you get your lorry started, I'll have the gates open for you. I gets my lorry started and pulls round the back. I drives along a concrete road and I found that one of their own lorries wanted to get out. I pulls off the road a bit for him to get by, and in the meantime I got out of my lorry, took the net bag and gloves out of my pocket and threw them into the stream, which runs through the cider works yard and into the cider works. When I got back to my lorry, I managed to turn round and take the bricks to where he wanted them. When I had unloaded, I went to the foreman to get my ticket signed. He signed it and I started the way I came in. I followed the road back onto the lane, turned right to get back on the main road. Proceeding down there, I threw the vest out of the side of the road going down. Going a little further down, I threw parts of the attaché case away, which in the meantime I had broke. A little further down, I chucked the jam sandwiches away. I then turned left on the main road and proceeded to make my way home. I carried on working for the firm, but this business worried me, so I went to the doctors to get something for my nerves. After that, I went all to pieces and packed my job up. That was on the Monday. I was out of work for nearly a week, and I got a job with Joshua Taylor of Abingdon as a gardener. That was where I was working when the officers came to see me. The wallet you have shown me is the one I had in my jacket in the cab of my lorry, and is the one the woman took. Although the statement taken down was signed Harold Hagger, it was under the name Sidney Sinclair that he was charged at Westmolling with the murder of Dagmar Petrywalski. He was remanded in custody as the detectives built their case before he appeared at Maidstone Assizes on Thursday the 27th of February before Mr Justice Byrne. It was to be the recently appointed judge's first murder trial. Derek Curtis Bennett led for the prosecution and claimed that the evidence and the statements Sinclair had made were enough to confirm his guilt. Melford Stevenson handled the defence and claimed Sinclair had accidentally strangled her while trying to prevent her stealing his wallet from his jacket, which he claimed was hanging up on a peg inside the cab. This was a crucial point, as the prosecution felt it unlikely he would be driving at dawn on a bitterly cold morning in an unheated cab just in shirt sleeves and not wearing his jacket. Notwithstanding medical evidence that Sinclair had suffered from blackouts and headaches following an accident 20 years earlier in which he had fractured his skull, there was no real evidence of any insanity. A declaration from the prisoner's wife that he had been one of the best husbands failed to garner any sympathy, and on the second day of the trial, the jury dismissed the story of accidental death and took little more than half an hour to find him guilty. Mr Justice Byrne then donned the black cap and for the first time condemned Sidney Sinclair to death. There was no recommendation to mercy and his appeal was swiftly dealt with. With Maidstone no longer carrying out executions, he was hanged at Wandsworth Jail on Tuesday the 18th of March 1947 by Albert Pierrepoint and Henry Critchell. Announcements of the execution in that morning's paper confirmed that although he had gone to the gallows as Sidney Sinclair, his real name was Harold Hagger. Within a year of the murder, Dagmar Peters' mother had sold the house and her daughter's hut to a farmer who knocked down both buildings and put up chicken coops. She then went to live with her son and daughter-in-law in Woking, where she died in 1956. There is no doubt Harold Hagger was the man that killed Dagmar Peters. But was it accidental, as he claimed, when he caught her tried to steal his wallet, or was there some other motive that never came out in court? And what became of the Jack Russell puppy? Confusing reports have said that the dog was found dead close to the hut, or had found a forever home with a local family. Neither seemed to be the case, and it would appear that during the attack, which led to Dagmar kicking open the lorry door as she was being assaulted, the traumatised puppy must have fled and its whereabouts remain a mystery. We can only hope its fate was kinder than that of its owner. The unsolved murder of Lillian Miller took a bizarre twist in 1982 when a man walked into a police station in Yorkshire and claimed that he had witnessed the murder while sheltering in a wooden shed. He said that the killer was his own father, a brutal bully, and that his mother had washed the blood-stained clothes and sworn her son to secrecy. Now with both parents passed away, he felt he owed it to Lillian's family to tell the truth. Kent Police launched an investigation, but there was little in the way of evidence other than the testimony of the son, who they had no reason to disbelieve was telling the truth. The murder of Sheila Martin, to this day, remains unsolved. You'll be watching another episode of Tales from the Hangman's Record. Until the next time, thank you and goodbye.